Welcome everybody to PubMed for Librarians. Today's session is about automatic term mapping. I am Rebecca Brown with the National Network of Libraries of Medicine Training Office. Glad you're here. Here is the order of events for today. I'm going to start with some search tips to consider when you use the general search box so that you can make the most of the programming that's behind the search box. We will look at search details in depth today. We'll talk about how to search for phrases, which is one of my favorite topics, but our focus is on ATM, or automatic term mapping, and how it can help you make the most of PubMed and getting relevant results. ATM is PubMed's behind-the-scenes process that kicks in automatically when you enter search terms into the general search box without any sort of qualifiers such as a search tag or quotation marks. We'll also talk about the order and format that ATM follows and where PubMed looks to find your search terms. That said, I will also show you how to bypass ATM when it's not doing what you want. So let's start with those search tips. So the search box lets you do a keyword search in a sophisticated way because of the way it's programmed. So I'm going to start with some other tips, some tips from the National Library of Medicine about how to use that search box effectively. The most important thing is to be as specific as possible for a couple of reasons. First, the indexer uses the most specific terms available when they apply mesh terms to an article. And the more terms you use, the narrower your search will be and the fewer results you'll retrieve, so be specific. Next, you don't need to use any punctuation such as quotation marks, at least for your first pass at the search, because that will turn off automatic term mapping. Quotes turns it off most of the time, and we'll look at the exceptions today. You don't need to use any Boolean operators. PubMed will add them automatically. And the only time you need to capitalize is when you do use Boolean operators. So I just said you don't need to use them, but if you do use them, go ahead and capitalize them. In 99% of the instances, capitalizing or not capitalizing your Booleans won't make a difference, but there are occasions if you use the wildcard or the asterisk, which is the wildcard in PubMed, and you may get 0 results if you don't capitalize. Number 5, PubMed can recognize and find phrases for you, and I'll show you what is sometimes called the phrase index. NLM suggests that you start your search without using search tags, such as what we see on the slide. AU stands for author. You can also spell that out, but for your first pass, they suggest that you don't use tags, but we'll look at when they can be useful or even necessary. And then lastly, PubMed is smart, or at least the people who program it are. PubMed can distinguish between subject words such as cancer and heart attack, also journal titles and author names based on years of data. And we're going to go into great detail today as to how PubMed does that. So this slide shows a search that I did for indigestion abdominal pain using the general search box. I've got the search details or query translation box, same thing, below it. I entered a total of 3 words, but as you can see in search details, PubMed did more than just look for those 3 words. Even though this search, the details are specific to this particular search, you'll begin to see the same thing or sort of a formula happening in search details for whatever search you do. So first we see that indigestion mapped to dyspepsia, the mesh term. So dyspepsia is the official preferred mesh term, but indigestion is an entry term or synonym of dyspepsia. When it maps to that mesh term, dyspepsia, that will bring in your Medline citations or citations with mesh terms. That got OR'd with searching for dyspepsia in all fields, so that's going to expand your search and go beyond just the Medline citations. And then lastly, it ORs the first 2 parts with indigestion. So even though there was a correct mapping to a mesh term, PubMed does not ignore the terms that you entered into the search box. PubMed will also search for indigestion in all fields. Then we've got abdominal pain. It apparently is also a mesh term, so that's nice. That's going to bring in our Medline citations. Whenever a mesh term is 2 or more words, and so abdominal pain is a 2-word mesh term, it mapped correctly in yellow here. The next thing you see, though, in search details is you'll see this for all 2 or more word mesh terms, is that automatic term mapping breaks up your term into pieces. It's going to search for abdominal in all fields and with pain in all fields. When it does that, it might find abdominal pain right next to each other. But then also another part of the theory would be that it will find abdominal in one place and pain in another place. If you want, because the query translation box or the search details box here is a live search box, you can edit your search from directly within search details here. Sometimes I eliminate things like that, the abdominal and pain, just to see what happens, and then rerun that search. Then the last part of the abdominal pain piece of the search is that PubMed will look for abdominal pain kept together as a phrase in all fields. You also see down here in the bottom, it says translations, and it lays out the exact same information that's in the search details box, but it does it line by line. There's nothing special about what's down here in gray. It's just easier to read for some folks. So the general search box is programmed to match your search terms against 3 translation tables that were developed from the data in PubMed. And when I say data, I mean things like subject words, author keywords that get sent over, mesh terms, journal titles, and author names that appear in PubMed. The 3 tables are just like what we see on the slide: subjects, journals, and authors, and that's the order that automatic term mapping goes in. That's number 1 on the handout: subjects, journals, authors. Notice on the bottom of the slide, I have a conveyor belt. That's supposed to represent the ATM process. So I want you to put on your sort of thinking caps here and envision your search terms as if they were on a conveyor belt. So when you throw them into the general search box, this is how they're going to get processed. ATM first tries to map your terms to the subject table, a subject such as indigestion. We already know that indigestion maps to dyspepsia. So once a mapping occurs, like we saw on the last slide, the term gets off the conveyor belt and processing on that term is complete. In the indigestion example, it would get off the conveyor belt and not move on to the next translation table, which is journals. Any remaining terms on the conveyor belt will move on to the next stop, which is journals. It's not just going to look for Medline journals, it's going to look for title abbreviations and ISSN numbers. I'll talk about that a little more in a bit. If a match is found for the journal titles, so on the conveyor belt here I have New England Journal of Medicine. That should map to the journal translation table there. It would get off the conveyor belt and not move on to the next stop, which is authors. So if a match is found in the author table, the author names get off the conveyor belt. If no match is found, all of the remaining terms will be searched for in all fields, which include the article titles and the abstracts. Remember, PubMed does not search for full text, does not search within full text, I should say. So let's take a closer look, even deeper, at that first stop on the conveyor belt, which is the subject table. So the subject table, that first stop, includes everything we see on this slide. So it's going to look for mesh terms, which indigestion mapped to dyspepsia because it's an entry term or a synonym. It's then going to try and map to subheadings, also supplementary concepts and publication types. And those are the 4 types of mesh terms that Jesse talked about last week if you were in the session: mesh headings, subheadings, supplementary concepts, and publication types. So they're all part of this subject translation table, plus the entry terms. And then we have what's known as the Unified Medical Language System, also known as UMLS. UMLS is a very large vocabulary database. It brings together a number of different medical vocabularies from different disciplines. For example, the insurance industry has a vocabulary database, and the laboratory industry, like when when they send our blood off to the lab to be tested, they have a vocabulary database as well. And all those terms are part of the UMLS vocabulary. The only reason I'm bringing this up is because sometimes you will find that your term maps correctly, but if you happen to go into the mesh record, you won't see your term in the entry term. So for example, and you can try this at home and save it maybe as an example, if you were to search in mesh for the term shin bone, 2 words, shin bone, it'll map correctly in mesh to tibia. But if you go and scroll in the mesh record, in the entry term section, you will not see any mention of shin bone. That's because it's actually getting pulled in from the UMLS vocabulary. It's just working behind the scenes, and too large, I believe, I'm going to say thousands of thousands, and there may be even hundreds of thousands of words in UMLS, so it's just too much stuff to show within individual mesh records. So that can explain sometimes why it maps, but you don't see your term in the list. So I'm at PubMed.gov. The first search I want to do is go ahead and type in the word backache, 1 word. We're going to search for that. We're not really going to look at the results, but I am sorted by most recent. I'm also logged in to my NCBI account. So you may see things that are not on your screen, but have nothing to do with what we're doing today. So I'm going to go locate search details. I'm scrolling down and looking on the right. I'm going to click on see more, and we'll look here and see what search details, what PubMed search did here. So backache mapped to the 2-word mesh term, back pain, so that's good. This is going to bring in our Medline citations. And so we see the same thing happening as we did with indigestion abdominal pain. The 2-word mesh term, back pain, is broken up into pieces. This helps expand our search, but once again, you can just delete it and rerun that search if you want. The last piece is it's going to look for back pain, not the last piece. It also looks for back pain in all fields. And then the very last piece is the term that we used, which is backache. So very much like indigestion abdominal pain. What happens once a term maps to the translation table, folks? Can you let me know in the chat box? James says it explodes the term. Well, terms are exploded, and we'll look at that in a little bit. I'm talking about mapping. It moves off, okay, Norris, it moves off the conveyor belt. Yes, it gets off the conveyor belt. It doesn't search in the other fields exactly. It does include mesh, so we had a mapping here, backache, correctly mapped to back pain mesh. That's great. So we have a mapping, and in this case, it's a correct mapping. So backache is getting off the conveyor belt, and it's not going to be searched in the remaining fields. So for example, if there were a journal titled backache, this term would not map because it's already mapped here. Yes, PubMed stops trying to match it to the translation tables. Yes, and this will hit home a little more when we get to the journal table, the next table, and you see how important this mapping is and getting off the conveyor belt, how it is really is so important. That was our first stop. Our term mapped to the subject table, got off the conveyor belt. Our next stop, because we're just going to pretend we have more terms in our search, is the journal translation table. So the general search box and ATM are programmed to recognize the full journal title, such as the New England Journal of Medicine, any Medline abbreviation. When I say Medline abbreviation, it doesn't have to be a Medline journal. There are more journals in PubMed than just Medline journals, so the official abbreviation for any journal in PubMed will work. And you can also search with the ISSN number if you know that, but you do need to use the dashes, no tag or anything. Just like the subject table looked at subheadings and supplementary concepts, the journal table looks at all of these types of journal titles in different forms. Now, if you enter just a piece of a journal title or an unofficial piece, an unofficial abbreviation, PubMed will not find a match. So let's give that a try. I'm going to go back to PubMed's home page by clicking the PubMed logo in the upper left corner. So let's start by searching. I mentioned the New England Journal of Medicine. Let's run that search. the New England Journal of Medicine, and Autosuggest comes up. I'm going to go ahead and choose that. It's going to run the search automatically when you choose a term from that list. And I have my highlighting on, which is one of the features that you can turn on using your MyNCBI account, which I cover during the customization session, which is July 14th. There's a lot of good tips in that session. All right, so we see that we got 75,000 or so results, and at least initially we see that they all came from the New England Journal of Medicine. And if we scroll and look at search details, which I'm going to click on See More, we see that automatic term mapping found the New England Journal of Medicine in the journal translation table. It's showing us the abbreviation, but we didn't need to search with that. It made a match. And then ATM went on to do what it does, which is then search for the title in all fields as well. So the first part of this search brings in all citations from the journal. The second part of the search brings mentions of the journal. So somewhere in the abstract, the New England Journal of Medicine may be mentioned. But if you're looking for just the citations, you can just get rid of that last part and rerun your search. Now, I've done that and noticed, let's see, it's 75,431. It doesn't really reduce it very much, a few hundred, less than 1,000 less. But now we definitely only have citations from the journal. So let's do another search. That one worked great. I'm going to clear my search box this time. This is kind of a fun one. Let's search for New England Journal. And notice here, for example, that in yellow here on my screen, this is the official abbreviation. But we're going to search for New England Journal because, you come in and you think PubMed must recognize this. If we searched in Google for New England Journal, there's a very good chance one of the first results would be the New England Journal of Medicine. But PubMed is not Google. Let's run this search. New England Journal. This time we got close to 70,000. And notice that we've got all sorts of journal titles here. New England is highlighted in the title of this first citation. None of these journal titles say New England Journal of Medicine. So let's look at search details. I'm going to click on See More. So the first thing that happened was New England mapped to New England, the mesh term. That's a geographic region. And then journal mapped to periodicals. So this is definitely not what we wanted. This is just an example of how searching with something unofficial doesn't work. Now I see Lisa said it recognized NEJM, so let's just do that, New England Journal of Medicine. And so that, but notice we did get a slightly different number. It's hard to know precisely. Oh, here, yeah, so I'm going to go to See More. So then it looked for the other part. It mapped to the journal correctly, but then it also then looked for New England Journal of Medicine. So in all fields, yeah. So once again, you can remove that and rerun your search if you just want the citations from the journal. And yeah, so there you go. If that's an official, I think this is an official abbreviation. All right, so number 2 on your handout, it's going to look for full title, Medline abbreviation, the ISSN. I told you it needs the dashes. You don't need to tag it. So I can go 0028-4793. Run that search, and once again, I get this familiar number of about 75,000 from the New England Journal of Medicine. Lisa asked, does it matter which ISSN you use? Some have an e-journal. And Lisa, I would just give it a try. Well, yeah, I would look at both. I would try both. So ATM is not foolproof, and a problem can arise for some journal titles because they are also mesh terms. So what are some examples? Let me know in the chat box. Okay, so right, we have here examples of journal titles that are also mesh terms. Pediatrics, nature, surgery, science, brain, possibly, right, yes, okay. Cancer, gut, blood, yeah. Also, gene is another one. I don't know, okay, we got science, all right. And cell is another one. So let's try this with the cell example. Go ahead and clear your PubMed search box and just type in the word cell. singular. And let's sort of start perusing what we've got on this page. So the first thing I see in my highlighting is the title is not cell, but I see the word cell highlighted in the title of the article. I see that happening. So let's look at search details. What happened here? Who can tell me why this map to mesh and not the journal title we're looking for? Okay, so it's the first stop of the conveyor belt, the mesh table, the subject table. Once it found a match, exactly, it stopped searching, as I see people writing. Michelle says it found it in other places, meaning the first stop, that subject table, which has all the 4 mesh terms on it and entry terms and UMLS, right. So cell mapped to the subject table. ATM went on and did its thing, very consistent. It keeps doing the same thing over and over, but that's not what we wanted. Tyler says we didn't tag it as a journal, so what else could we expect? And Tyler just led me to my next question is how can we adjust the search to find citations from this journal? Or in other words, how can we turn off or bypass ATM for this particular search? Now Tyler mentioned the tag, so we can use a tag, square bracket, journal, square bracket. There are different ways. I can even just type it in JOUR. And I'll also point out that it doesn't matter if you have a space or not between the word and the square bracket. You can have them butted up right up against each other and it will still work. So let's run this search. We got 18,712 results. Now I'm seeing the title highlighted in yellow. I see other things highlighted because the DOI, the word cell, is in the digital object identifier there and also in the title. But it brought in 18,000 results from the journal cell. And if we look at search details, that is indeed what it did or happened because, well, we told it to look there. So that worked. Another way to adjust this search when it's not working the way you want is to use the Advanced Search Builder. Advanced is a link directly under the general search box. So here's the builder in the center of the page. It defaults to all fields, but if you use the little drop-down arrow, we have all sorts of other fields that we can tell PubMed to search in. You can choose journal, and I'm going to enter the word cell. What I'd like you to do is find the show index list to the right of the search box and click on show index list. And here we see the first entry in the list. It says cell, 18,712 results. That's the exact number we got when we ran the tag search for cell. So if we ran this search, that's how many results we would get. So it's kind of nice. This feature here tells you how many results you'll get. Then the last place that was mentioned was single citation matcher. So I'm going to go to PubMed's home. And then in the center column under PubMed Tools, it says Single Citation Matcher. A few years ago, National Library of Medicine actually announced that they were, for the second time, that they were going to take away this Single Citation Matcher feature. So I stopped teaching it, basically, unless other people brought it up. Now, NLM says they're going to keep it. So here, using Single Citation Matcher, it's sort of like the Advanced Search Builder, but or fields or tag searching. If you just type in cell, you're telling PubMed to only search in the journal field, run your search, and we get the same amount of results. So that's great. The other option that you've got is trying, Molly showed a search, Fauci cell 2013. Anthony Fauci is the director of one of the National Institutes of Health. What this search does is kicks in the citation censor. And this worked. Even though a search with just the word cell doesn't work, this works. And NLM wants to encourage you to use the general search box as much as possible because the citation censor algorithm actually improves the more people use it. But it may not always work for you. If you're just searching for cell, clearly that's not going to work for you. So let me start by asking you a question. How many of you have tried to find all PubMed citations by a particular author? Let me know in the chat box. Somebody comes to you and says, I want all citations by so-and-so, or even the author comes to you. I'm saying, yes, 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 I have. Yup, definitely. Yes, oh yes. Right. Oh, we have a no. Okay, follow-up question. So a follow-up question, how many of you have been frustrated by that process? Yes, yes, yes. Oh, yes, again. Me, Carrie's been frustrated. Yes, not Kathy. Kathy's not. Roxanne raises her hand, yes. Probably both hands. Right, okay. Well, I hope I hope it makes you feel better that you're not alone. Understanding how ATM identifies or recognizes a name will help you run a more successful author search. And this is sort of an interesting factoid. Searching for an author's name is the #1 type of search people do in PubMed. They come to PubMed, they put in an author's name, trying to find citations by that author, or maybe it's themselves. Understanding how this author translation table is formatted will help you run a better search, I'll say. So there are 2 parts to the author translation table. There's the author index. It is the most comprehensive. It includes all author names for all years of publication going back to 1946. Now, you may get some earlier citations going back earlier. Those are just icing on the cake, but NLM is willing to go out on a limb and guarantee that this table covers back to 1946. The author table is formatted last name with a space. It doesn't say space, but there would be a space, and then up to 2 initials. So here's an example, Dennis space S-E, last name Dennis, first 2 initials. Then we have the full name index, or the full author name index. The full name index began in 2002, so already we know that this is much less comprehensive. One thing to understand is that it began in 2002, and the National Library of Medicine did not go back and look for all full names of authors to add them to this index. It was just going forward from 2002, and only some journals submit that information. Not all journals print with full names, and not all journals submit that to National Library of Medicine, so it's a much less comprehensive index. But you can search with the name natural or inverted, so Dennis Sharon E. is inverted, but we could search Sharon E. Dennis. That is not the case with the author index. Okay, so we'll be trying several author searches here in just a moment. So let's jump back into PubMed. I'm going to clear my search box, and we're going to search for an author name in 3 different ways. Lisa asks, authors get to pick as well, correct? If, Lisa, you're asking if they get to pick how their name appears in the journal, I don't know precisely. I mean, yes and no. I have not worked with an author when they submit something to a journal, but I'm guessing that they use their full name, you know, Rebecca Brown, Sharon Dennis, what have you. And that's great, but then the publisher decides they have their own format of how they submit, well, how they display names in the journal and how they submit information to the National Library of Medicine. So at some point it is out of the author's hands. I don't know all the ins and outs of publishing, but they definitely don't get to pick what PubMed shows. And that information comes from publishers. So it's whatever the publishers say. Okay, so let's run an author search 3 different ways. And we're going to start with the full name. So I'm going to put in inverted Dennis Sharon E. Now, Sharon used to be my boss, and she used to be a really great example. She's still a good example. There was a change, and I'll show you that. But because she knows how many citations she has. Not every author does. So if we look at these, we use the full name, and these were published in 2003, which makes sense. It makes sense that we were able to bring these in because the full author index began in 2002, and I would, based on this search results, apparently academic medicine submits author names, supplies the full author name. And so we can search with that full name. It'll map to the full name index post-2002. So that works. But what about anything that happened before 2002 or 2003? Is this a comprehensive search? And Maggie is saying, why are you using a name that has ambiguity between first and last name? Well, Yes, and I'll show you some things about that. And I'll show you how to disambiguate in just a little bit. For this, like I say, I know Sharon, so I'm not confused here. But I mostly used this example because of a specific number of results that I knew I would get. I don't even remember the question I asked. Oh yeah, would this bring in earlier citations? No, it's not going to bring in earlier citations. We missed all those, anything prior. One more thing I want to show you in search details. I won't go big, but this is indeed where automatic term mapping found a match in the full author name index. Now, even though there's a comma there, we did not need to search with that, but I'll show you how you can use a comma to disambiguate later. Okay, so now let's try and map to the author index by using last name, space, and up to 2 initials is what the index will map. So let's rerun that search. This time we get 5 results. I'm just going to skip over that first one. This actually is a different S.E. Dennis. This was published in March of this year. I used to just get 4 results, and then some other S.E. Dennis in the world published an article, and now they're brought into my search. So I'm just going to ignore them because I know that these number 2 through 5 are actually my friend Sharon's citations. The first 2 are the same as that we got when we did the full name search. They're the ones from 2003, and now we have one from 2001 and one from 1998, which did not come in because full name index wasn't even in existence in 2001 or 1998. Much more comprehensive search. Now, let's say you're working with Sharon Dennis or anybody else, and she says, well, you know, I don't know if I've always published with my middle initial, or more likely the case might be, I don't know if the journal I published in used my middle initial or submitted it to PubMed. So let's run a search without that middle initial, and let's run that search. So we go from 5 results to 525. Now, you and I know that she doesn't have 525 citations, but some authors don't know how many they have, published, especially if they have a very long career, very prolific. If you were to run a search without the middle initial, just to make sure that you could be as comprehensive as possible, you would have to do some sleuthing, some detective work to figure out, which of these came from other S. Dennises. And I'll show you if we scroll down. So number 15 brings in S.K. Dennis, and number 13 brings S.C. Dennis. So when you just use the first initial, it almost acts like a wild card and brings in all variations of Dennis S. So it brings in plain old Dennis S plus all these other ones with 2 initials. Let's see. Are orchids in PubMed? Mark says yes, they are. So ORC IDs, I don't know what it stands for, but it's ORC, ORC ID, and there's an organization that assigns, these are author identifiers. And you can use them to search in PubMed if the author has one. Many authors do not, but if you do know an author's ID, you can use that. Make sure you include the dashes. I'll show you one place where you can find that field. I'm going to go back using my advanced link to go back to that search builder. The search builder is like all things to all people. It does lots of different things. I'm going to click on the All Fields menu here, and you're going to look for Author Identifier. And what I usually do actually to find an example is type in a couple of zeros, and then I do Show Index List. And so these are what ORC IDs look like. They're really long. And then the number that's in parentheses is the number of citations by each of those authors. Now, it does not show dashes here, but if you were to grab somebody's ORC ID from somewhere else or type it in manually, just make sure to include those dashes. Molly's putting in something about ORC IDs, so that is something that is available, but not all authors have them. So this last search that we did for Dennis space S, we were trying to run the most comprehensive search and map to the author index. I want to scroll to search details and show that to you because something new came up that we hadn't seen before. So notice here it says Dennis S investigator. Investigators are people who assisted with the research, but not the writing. So they're not authors, they're investigators. The author table lives right next to the author index and the full name index. There's an investigator index and a full name investigator index. It's much less common thing or detail for people to be searching for, but when PubMed searches for a name, it's looking at the author index, full name index, and the investigator indexes. So you may see that as well. So for some names, you may need to identify which is the first and which is the last, which we kind of have this here. And actually, Sharon's husband is Bill Dennis, two last names that are first. If we wanted, we could put a comma here, and this would tell PubMed, I am looking for Ms. Sharon Dennis, not Dennis Sharon. Or I could go Brian James. To me, these names are two first names, but they're also last names. So we could do the same. If we're looking for Mr. James Ryan, comma, James, or vice versa. So that's the use of the comma and disambiguating which is first and which is second or last name. You can also include a suffix, junior, senior, and you would put that at the end. So Gates, W, so last name, space, first initial, junior, just like that, JR. And here we have one result comes up for him, Gates, W, Jr. And if you look in search details, that's where it was found. Let's see what else. We've got some other fun things to look at before we're done. All right, but let me just say the takeaway message about searching for authors really is use the last name, space, first initial format. That will be the most comprehensive. It'll map to that author index that goes to back to 1946 or earlier. Let's see, so sometimes ATM does its job, but it doesn't map or translate things the way we want, and we saw that with the journal Cell. And let's look at some other examples. So let's search for the phrase pressure point. I'm going to clear my search box. I'm in PubMed. No quotation marks at this point, just pressure point. But I am this is a phrase, and I want to keep the terms together. Now, we got 27,000 or so results. And with my highlighting, point is highlighted. Then I've got pressure. And if we look at search details, we see that pressure mapped to pressure the mesh term. And so basically, as far as I'm concerned, this was a bad search, didn't do what I wanted it to do. I wanted everything to, definitely did not want pressure the mesh term. So let's try what we often try in other databases, right? We've kind of learned out in the world that if we put quotes around a phrase, it will force whatever database we're looking in to search just for that phrase. And that works. I don't know about places like Ovid or EBSCO, Medline, but it probably works in Google or Yahoo, what have you. It may or may not work in PubMed, and we're going to look and see why. So this time I'm going to give you a heads up. It is going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We get 141 results. And if you look at my highlighting in the title of some of these, we see the exact phrase I was looking for. And in search details, we see that it kept the phrase together and searched for it in all fields. If this was a mesh term and we put quotes around it, we would see a big difference in our results. So let me give you an example. Health planning. Health planning is a mesh term. We get almost 400,000 results. If we look at search details, health planning mapped to health planning mesh, and so I'm just going to accept the rest of what ATM did and say, okay, this is a successful search. We got the mapping we wanted. But let's just, for the heck of it, put quotes around it. So let's run it again. We go from 400,000 results to 37 or 38,000 results. So, a tenth of the results. And let's look and see what happened here in search details. So instead of mapping to health planning the mesh term, when we used quotes, it turned off automatic term mapping. but it also turns off automatic explosion, which Jesse discussed in the mesh session last week. And let me show you what I mean. So here I am in the health planning record in mesh. I'm going to scroll down to the hierarchy section and see that there are a bunch of narrower terms below health planning. And explosion means that when you search for the general term, in this case, health planning, the citations that are brought in will also include citations that have been indexed with the narrower terms, in addition to just citations about health planning. When we put quotes around a mesh term, it turns off ATM and it turns off explosion, which is why we got way less than we did, 400,000 versus 37,000. NLM does not recommend using quotes, at least initially. We've seen some, like the good side and bad side of using quotes. We put quotes around pressure point that helped, and we looked at health planning with a mesh term with and without quotes and the difference that can make. Let's try another phrase because we think we have a solution that we can generalize. So let's try in the general search box, bedtime media. 2 words, bedtime media. We're looking for literature about using your phone or computers right at bedtime, which they suggest you don't do. So let's run that without quotes. I got 56 results. I see with my highlighting, I've got media. Now, some of these results I've actually looked through. They are relevant results, but if I want to be strict and say, well, I want those 2 words to stay together, that didn't happen. And we see that search details did what it did for health planning. It broke it up. We're going to take our solution that worked for pressure points, and we'll put quotes around that. We'll show PubMed. We learned something. Now, remember, we have 56 results without quotes. Let's run that search again. This time, we did it with quotes. We got the same number of results. How many people have seen this message before? Quoted phrase, not found. There's a yellow sign with an exclamation point. Quoted phrase, not found. Has anybody else seen that? I remember years ago, the first time I ever saw it, and I was a real novice with PubMed. I'm like, what are you talking about, quoted phrase not found? I've got results. I didn't know to look in search details. Search details are exactly the same as when we didn't use quotes. So what the heck does this mean, and what does this message really mean? Quoted phrase not found. I'm going to go to my the Advanced Search Builder by clicking Advanced under the General Search box. I'm going to go back to one of my best friends here, the Builder. I'm going to leave it at all fields, and I'm going to type in bedtime media. I'm not going to run the search. I'm going to click on Show Index List. This is also known as the phrase index. You can type in a phrase, and if it's been indexed, meaning included in the lists that PubMed will check, you'll see it in this list. So bedtime media is not here because it would be first on the top of this list if it was. There are some other possibilities here, bedtime mobile phone. I mean, we're not really running a search today, but if you were and you got that quoted phrase not found, you could look at this list. Not all of them are going to be relevant to you, but like mobile phone use has 1 citation. You could run that search and then maybe find some, I'm looking at the mesh terms, some other mesh terms or terms that the indexers use to talk about this subject, in this case, cell phone utilization, sleep, etc. So if you search with a phrase and you get that quoted phrase not found message, the next thing you do should be to go into that advanced search and just double check, is my phrase indexed or not? Because PubMed can only find things that it knows about. So, okay, did I miss anything? Okay, hold on. Kathy wants to know, what is the best way to search for names with multiple middle or last names, hypothetically? Now, do we know, is this Julio de la Vega? Is he an author? Because I can use that. Let's see. Let's see what happens without. Yeah, okay. So now it didn't find that name in the author title because maybe this person isn't a known, and actually we didn't get that person. We got Lasso. But here's an example. L, okay, L for Nan here. I'm going to put this in here. So here we have a hyphenated name and a first initial. We don't know what this person's, so that tells you. So this would map to the author in, oh, he's from your imagination. Thank you, Kathy. This would have mapped to the author table because we use that format, last name, whatever it is, multiple last, you know, hyphenated, whatever, space, and then an initial. Jesse put a link into searching with full author names, but one of your best tricks should be to look at your search details and did it map to the author index? If it mapped to the author index, then the next part of your job is to determine whether or not these are all the exact same person. Mark said, I just posted a question about vendor names, yeah, on MedLib. So this is right, yes, Jessie is like the queen of vendor names. Jessie Vander Volgen, and they're all spelled very differently, as you may have found out, Mark. Some are capitalized, some are not. Let's see if we go to author. Yeah, there are a lot of Vanders out there, but capitalization wouldn't matter in this case. But unless you had somebody like Vander, you know, somebody. Van Vandervolgen, we probably wouldn't have to tell PubMed, which is the first name. We did the author searching, phrase searching, and we talked about ways that you can turn off or bypass ATM. Search tags, we tried the journal tag. We didn't use the author tag, but you could use that. I think you can actually even use just the last name and the author tag. Now that would be a very broad search, you know, especially, you know, if you used Brown tagged as author, a lot of Browns out there. Quotation marks work sometimes, but not all the times. If you put a phrase, if you put quotes around a phrase and you get that quoted phrase not found, then you need to look at that advanced search index and verify, you know, that your phrase is definitely not in there. And that's where Advanced Search Builder comes in. And then we also use Single Citation Matcher that helped us bypass ATM.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the National Network of Libraries of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel. Select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.